The morning light slanted through the kitchen windows, catching the steam rising from Eleanor's carefully brewed coffee. She'd spent extra time today making Richard's favorite blueberry pancakes, hoping good food might soften whatever was causing the tight lines around his mouth. Her son had been increasingly distant over the past few months, his visits becoming shorter, his calls rarer. At 42, Richard had moved back into her guest house 3 years ago after his divorce, a temporary arrangement that had somehow stretched into permanence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, we need to talk about your situation, Richard said, cutting into his third pancake without looking up. His voice carried that particular tone Eleanor had come to recognize over the years, the one that meant he was about to suggest something she wouldn't like. My situation? Eleanor kept her voice light, though her hands tightened around her coffee mug. After 40 years in education, the last 15 as principal of Westridge Elementary, she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when someone was working up to something unpleasant. Your retirement plan isn't sustainable, Richard continued, finally meeting her eyes. You can't keep living like this. The property taxes on this place alone are eating up your pension. Eleanor looked around her kitchen, the warm yellow walls she'd painted herself, the handcrafted oak cabinets her late husband Thomas had installed 30 years ago, the garden visible through the window where she grew the herbs and vegetables that sustained her through summer and fall. I manage just fine, she said quietly. The pension covers my needs, and the house is paid off. Richard made a sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh. Mom, be realistic. This place is too big for you. The maintenance alone is going to bankrupt you. And what happens when you need more care? Have you thought about that? Eleanor had, in fact, thought about it extensively. She'd met with her financial advisor just last month, reviewed her savings, her investments, the small life insurance policy Thomas had left her. She was comfortable, not wealthy, but secure. The property had appreciated considerably over the decades, providing a safety net she hoped never to use. I appreciate your concern, Richard, but my finances are in order. Are they? Richard's voice took on a sharper edge. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're one emergency away from disaster. The roof needs replacing. The furnace is ancient. This house is a money pit. Eleanor felt her patience beginning to fray. Richard, I've managed my affairs successfully for longer than you've been alive. You need to be practical. Richard's fist came down on the table, making the silverware jump. You can't just live in denial until everything falls apart. What happens then? Who do you think will have to pick up the pieces? The implication hung in the air between them. Eleanor set down her coffee mug carefully, feeling something cold and hard forming in her chest. Is that what you're worried about? That you'll have to pick up the pieces of my life? Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Thomas that it made Eleanor's heart ache despite her growing anger. Someone will have to, he muttered. And since I'm your only child, it's obviously going to fall on me. Eleanor stood up, gathering their plates with precise movements that belied the trembling she felt inside. I've never asked you to be responsible for me, Richard. Not once. But you will. His voice rose. That's how it works, Mom. Parents get old, they need help, and their kids have to put their own lives on hold to take care of them. Do you have any idea what that would do to my career? To my life? Eleanor turned away, focusing on rinsing the plates rather than on the pain his words caused. Richard had always been self-centered, even as a child. Thomas had called it healthy ambition, but Eleanor had recognized it for what it was, a fundamental inability to see beyond his own needs. She'd hoped he would outgrow it. Clearly, he hadn't. Richard, she said finally, turning back to face him, I have no intention of becoming dependent on you or anyone else. You say that now, but we both know how this ends. Richard stood, pacing the kitchen with nervous energy. Look, I've been talking to Vanessa about this. Vanessa? Eleanor interrupted. Your girlfriend of 4 months is now consulting on my financial future? Richard had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but he pushed on. She works in elder care management. She knows about these things. And we think, you should start looking at assisted living options now, while you can still make the choice yourself. Eleanor felt as though she'd been doused with ice water. Assisted living? Richard, I'm 65, not 90. I'm in excellent health. I still volunteer at the school 3 days a week. I teach water aerobics at the community center. Now, Richard said, his tone suggesting he was being the only reasonable one in the conversation. But that won't last forever. And these places have waiting lists. The good ones, anyway. You need to plan ahead. Eleanor took a deep breath, summoning the calm that had served her through decades of parent-teacher conferences and school board meetings. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm not ready for assisted living. This is my home, and I intend to stay here." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something in Richard's expression changed then, a calculation entering his eyes that made Eleanor's stomach tighten with apprehension. "About that," he said, his tone deliberately casual. "I've been thinking. This property is way too valuable to just sit here depreciating. If you sold it, you could easily fund a very comfortable retirement situation and have money left over." "Sell my home?" Eleanor couldn't keep the shock from her voice. "The home your father and I built together? Where you grew up? It's just a house, Mom," Richard said with the callous dismissal of someone who had never created a home of his own. "A financial asset that's being underutilized. If you sold it, you'd have more than enough for a really nice assisted living community. The one Vanessa recommends has a pool, activities, restaurant-quality dining, and where would you live?" Eleanor asked quietly. "If I sold this underutilized asset?" Richard blinked, momentarily thrown off his prepared speech. "Well, I'd find a place, obviously. The real estate market is challenging right now, but I'm sure I could. So this is about you needing a place to stay rent-free more than it is about my retirement planning." Eleanor didn't phrase it as a question. Richard's face flushed. "That's not fair. I'm thinking about what's best for you." "Are you?" Eleanor walked to the window, looking out at the guest house where Richard had been living since his divorce. The divorce that had happened after he'd cheated on Rebecca, his wife of 15 years, with a coworker. Rebecca, who'd been like a daughter to Eleanor, who still called every few weeks just to check in. "Mom, be reasonable," Richard said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone that set Eleanor's teeth on edge. "You can't maintain this property forever. Sooner or later, you're going to have to face reality." Eleanor turned back to him, studying her son's face. When had the little boy who'd once brought her dandelion bouquets turned into this stranger who saw her as nothing but a burden and her home as nothing but a financial asset? "I think I'm facing reality quite clearly right now," she said softly. Richard must have sensed he was losing ground, because his approach suddenly changed. "I just want what's best for you," he said, his voice gentling. "You've worked so hard all your life. Don't you deserve to relax now? To be taken care of for a change?" The manipulation was so transparent it almost made Eleanor laugh. "Almost. What I deserve," she said carefully, "is respect for my decisions about my own life." Richard's facade of concern cracked. "Your decisions affect me too. Do you think I want to spend my 50s caring for an elderly parent? Do you think I planned to put my life on hold because you're too stubborn to see what's coming? No one is asking you to put your life on hold, Richard." Eleanor felt a strange calm settling over her, the kind that comes with perfect clarity. "In fact, I'm not asking anything of you at all. That's not how it works." Richard's voice rose again. "You're my mother. Your care will become my responsibility whether we like it or not." "I am not a burden to be managed," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. "I am not a problem to be solved. And I will not be spoken to as if I'm a child incapable of managing my own affairs." Richard threw up his hands in frustration. "This is exactly what Vanessa warned me about. Denial. Resistance. Inability to accept the reality of aging." "Richard," Eleanor said, a warning note entering her voice. "You're 42 years old, living in your mother's guest house because you can't afford your own place after your divorce. Perhaps you're not in the best position to lecture anyone about denial." The words landed like a slap. Richard's face flushed dark with anger. "You think you're so self-sufficient? So independent? Let's see how well you do when you fall and break your hip, or when you can't remember where you put your keys, or when you can't drive anymore. Who do you think will be there to pick up the pieces? To drive you to doctor's appointments? To make sure you're eating properly?" Eleanor felt her own anger rising to match his. "I have friends. I have a community. I have resources you know nothing about because you've never bothered to ask about my life." "Friends?" Richard scoffed. "You mean those other old ladies from the school? Great plan, Mom. The blind leading the blind." Something snapped inside Eleanor then, a lifetime of patience, of making excuses for her son's selfishness, of believing that deep down he had the same capacity for empathy and kindness that his father had possessed. "I think you should leave," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion inside her. Richard blinked, thrown off balance by her sudden shift. "What? I think you should leave my house now." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, drawing on the authority that had once made troublesome students and confrontational parents alike think twice about challenging her. "I need some time to think, and you clearly need some time to reconsider how you speak to your mother." "You're overreacting," Richard said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. I'm just trying to have an adult conversation. About your future. There was nothing adult about this conversation, Eleanor replied. Adults don't speak to people they claim to care about with such disrespect. They don't make unfounded assumptions about others' capabilities. And they certainly don't try to manipulate their parents out of their homes for their own financial benefit. Richard's expression hardened. Fine. Have it your way. But don't come crying to me when reality hits and you realize I was right all along. I won't, Eleanor promised, and meant it. She watched through the window as her son stormed across the yard to the guest house, slamming the door behind him. Only when he was out of sight did she allow herself to sink into a kitchen chair, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline of their confrontation began to ebb. The familiar kitchen suddenly felt different, as if their argument had changed. The very atmosphere of her home. She looked around at the space she and Thomas had created together, where they'd raised their son, celebrated holidays, weathered sorrows, built a life brick by brick, memory by memory. And for the first time, she wondered if Richard was right about one thing: maybe it was time to think about selling the house, but not for the reasons he imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Eleanor picked it up, expecting perhaps an apology from Richard, though that would have been out of character for him. Instead, she saw Rebecca's name on the screen. Just checking in, the message read. Hope you're having a good weekend. Still on for lunch on Thursday? Eleanor stared at the text from her former daughter-in-law, feeling something shift inside her. Rebecca, who'd been cast aside by Richard just as he now wanted to cast aside his mother. Rebecca, who despite everything, had maintained her connection to Eleanor, treating her with the respect and affection that should have come from her own son. Actually, Eleanor typed back, I could use some advice. Are you free for coffee today? Instead? The response came almost immediately, of course. Usual place in an hour? Perfect, Eleanor replied. Thank you. She set down her phone, a plan already beginning to form in her mind. Richard had made it abundantly clear how he saw her, as a burden, a responsibility, an inconvenience to his life plans. But Eleanor Winters had spent 65 years on this earth, 40 of them guiding young minds and managing complex institutions. She was not about to be dismissed as irrelevant by anyone, least of all by her own son. The usual place was a small cafe 3 blocks from Eleanor's house, a cozy establishment with mismatched furniture and the best scones in Portland. It had become their meeting spot in the aftermath of Richard and Rebecca's divorce, a neutral territory where they could maintain their relationship without Richard's knowledge or interference. Rebecca was already there when Eleanor arrived, seated at their favorite corner table with 2 steaming mugs waiting. At 40, Rebecca Wilson had the kind of quiet beauty that came from intelligence and kindness rather than conventional prettiness. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the casual weekend uniform of jeans and a comfortable sweater. Ellie, she said, standing to embrace Eleanor warmly. It's so good to see you. Is everything okay? Your text seemed urgent. Eleanor returned the hug, grateful for this unexpected daughter of her heart. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. I had a difficult conversation with Richard this morning. Rebecca's expression grew concerned as they both sat down. What happened? Eleanor wrapped her hands around the mug of tea Rebecca had ordered for her, English breakfast with a splash of milk, exactly how she liked it. The fact that Rebecca remembered such details while her own son seemed to forget even her birthday most years was not lost on her. He thinks I should sell the house and move into assisted living, Eleanor said, deciding directness was the best approach. He says I'm one emergency away from becoming his responsibility, and he doesn't want his life disrupted by having to care for his aging mother. Rebecca's eyes widened. He actually said that to you? Those words? Eleanor nodded, recounting the conversation as accurately as she could, including Richard's condescending tone and his invocation of Vanessa's supposed expertise. By the time she finished, Rebecca's expression had transformed from concern to outrage. I don't even have words, Rebecca said, shaking her head. Though I shouldn't be surprised. This is classic Richard, reframing his own self-interest as concern for others. It's certainly familiar territory, Eleanor agreed with a wry smile. But it did force me to think about some things I've been avoiding. Not assisted living, I'm nowhere near ready for that, but the house itself. Rebecca tilted her head questioningly. What do you mean? Eleanor took a sip of her tea, organizing her thoughts. The house is too big for just me. I've known that since Thomas passed, but I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the home we built together. And then Richard moved into the guest house. After your divorce, and it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. He was supposed to stay for 3 months, Rebecca reminded her gently. It's been 3 years. Yes. Eleanor sighed. And in that time, he's paid no rent, contributed nothing to the utilities, and as far as I can tell, saved none of his supposedly substantial income. That sounds like Richard, Rebecca said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. He always has money for what he wants, but never for what he needs. Or for what others need from him. Eleanor nodded, thinking of the child support payments Rebecca had fought to receive, the ones Richard still complained about despite his six-figure salary at the tech company where he worked. The thing is, Eleanor continued, selling the house isn't actually a bad idea. It's valuable property in a desirable neighborhood. The market is strong right now. I could purchase something smaller, more manageable, and have a significant amount left over to secure my future. That makes sense, Rebecca agreed. But I'm guessing Richard's plan involves him continuing to live rent-free wherever you end up? Naturally, Eleanor said dryly. Though he presented it as concern for my welfare rather than his own housing situation. Rebecca's laugh held no humor. Of course he did. Richard has always been gifted at recasting his self-interest as altruism. It's what made him such a successful sales director. Eleanor hesitated, then decided to share the thought that had been forming since her confrontation with Richard. I'm considering selling the house, but not in the way Richard expects. Oh? Rebecca leaned forward, intrigued. Richard doesn't know this, but the guest house isn't actually part of my property, legally speaking, Eleanor explained. When Thomas and I bought the land 30 years ago, it was actually 2 adjacent lots with separate deeds. The previous owner had used the smaller lot for their aging parents, building what we now call the guest house. We maintained the separate deeds for tax purposes. Rebecca's eyes widened as she began to understand the implications. So you could sell the main house and property, while retaining ownership of the lot where the guest house sits. Eleanor finished. Or selling it separately. Does Richard know this? No, Eleanor shook her head. It never seemed relevant until now. He's always referred to it as the guest house or the back house. I doubt he's ever given any thought to the legal designation of the property. Rebecca's expression was a mixture of shock and admiration. Ellie, that's brilliant. Actually. But also potentially explosive. Richard will be furious when he finds out. Yes, Eleanor agreed, feeling a strange calmness settle over her. He probably will be. But I'm beginning to think it's time Richard faced some consequences. For his actions. He's 42 years old and has never had to truly support himself. Thomas and I always provided a safety net. Even after the divorce, he had the guest house to fall back on. He needs to grow up, Rebecca said quietly. I realized that too late. Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze Rebecca's hand. We both wanted to see the best in him. There's no shame in that. So what's your plan? Rebecca asked. Sell the main house and then what? Where will you live? That's where I could use your advice, Eleanor admitted. I've been thinking about downsizing for a while, even before Richard's intervention this morning. A condo, perhaps, or a smaller house in a quieter neighborhood. Something manageable for one person, with less maintenance. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. I might be able to help with that, actually. My firm just listed a lovely little craftsman bungalow in Selwood. It's completely renovated, all on one level, with a small, manageable garden. It's the perfect size for one person, maybe 2. And it's within walking distance of shops and restaurants. Eleanor felt a spark of interest. Rebecca had established herself as a successful real estate agent after the divorce, turning what had been a part-time job during her marriage into a thriving career. That sounds promising, she said. But what about the guest house situation? If I sell the main house, Richard will have to know sooner or later that the property he's living on is separate. Rebecca's expression turned thoughtful. You have several options. You could sell both properties separately. You could sell just the main house and keep the guest house lot, either continuing to let Richard live there or not. Or you could sell both properties together to a buyer who understands the situation and is willing to work with the current tenant arrangement. Eleanor considered these possibilities, each with their own implications. I need to think about this carefully, she said finally. Whatever I decide, I want it to be deliberate, not reactive. Richard accused me of not planning for my future. I intend to prove him wrong. That's the Eleanor Winters I know, Rebecca said with a smile. Thoughtful, strategic, and not to be underestimated. They spent the next hour discussing practical considerations, property values, market timing, potential neighborhoods for Eleanor's next home. By the time they parted with a warm hug, Eleanor had the outlines of a plan forming in her mind. Thank you, she told Rebecca sincerely. Not just for the real estate advice, but for being someone I can trust with this. Always, Rebecca replied. You were there for me during the worst time of my life. I'm grateful to be able to return even a fraction of that support. As Eleanor walked home, she felt lighter than she had in months, perhaps years. Richard's cruel words had hurt deeply, but they had also cut through the fog of complacency that had surrounded her since Thomas's death. She had been drifting, allowing life to happen to her rather than actively shaping her future. No more. Eleanor Winters had spent her career helping young minds develop and grow. She had managed budgets, resolved conflicts, made difficult decisions. That affected hundreds of lives. She was not about to be dismissed as incapable by her own son. Richard's car was gone from the driveway when she arrived home, a small mercy. She wasn't ready to face him again yet, not until she had fully formulated her plan. Instead, she went directly to her home office, a small room off the kitchen that had once been Thomas's domain but which she had gradually made her own. From the filing cabinet, she extracted the property deeds, confirming what she had told Rebecca about the separate lots. She also pulled out her financial records, her retirement accounts, her insurance policies. For the next several hours, she immersed herself in the details of her financial situation, creating spreadsheets, running calculations, researching market values. By the time darkness fell outside her window, Eleanor had a clear picture of her options. And with that clarity came a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since retiring from the school system 5 years ago. Richard might see her as a burden, an inconvenient responsibility to be managed and minimized. But Eleanor saw herself differently, as a woman with resources, with options, with the power to shape her own future. And perhaps, if she was very deliberate about how she proceeded, she might even be able to teach her son one final, much-needed lesson about respect, consequences, and the true meaning of family. She made her coffee and carried it out to the back porch, watching the morning light paint the garden in golden hues. The property had never looked more beautiful, and for a moment she felt a pang of regret at the thought of leaving it. This had been her sanctuary for 30 years, the place where she and Thomas had built their life together, raised their son, celebrated countless milestones. But a house wasn't a life. It was a vessel for living, and perhaps it was time for a new vessel, one better suited to the life she wanted to create for her remaining years. Her phone chimed with a text from Rebecca, arranged for you to see the Selwood bungalow at 10 if you're interested. No pressure, just thought you might want to take a look. Eleanor smiled at the thoughtfulness. Rebecca understood her need to move deliberately, to consider all options before making decisions. It was one of the many qualities that made her such a valued friend. I'd love to, she texted back. Thank you. The sound of a door slamming announced Richard's departure from the guest house. Eleanor watched through the kitchen window as he strode to his car, his body language radiating irritation even from a distance. He didn't look toward the main house, didn't check to see if his mother might be watching, might want to speak with him after yesterday's confrontation. The sight strengthened her resolve. Whatever decision she made about the property, it needed to serve her future, not Richard's convenience. The Selwood bungalow was everything Rebecca had promised: charming, manageable, and perfectly situated in a vibrant neighborhood filled with small shops, cafes, and tree-lined streets. Built in the 1920s, it had been completely renovated by the current owners, combining vintage character with modern amenities. The kitchen was redone last year, Rebecca explained as they toured the space. All new appliances, quartz countertops. But they kept the original cabinetry and had it professionally restored. Eleanor ran her hand along the smooth wooden surface of a cabinet door, admiring the craftsmanship. Thomas would have appreciated that. He always said they don't make things like they used to. The house was modest by comparison to her current home, 2 bedrooms instead of 4, a small but beautifully landscaped yard rather than her sprawling garden, a single-car garage instead of the 2-car structure Thomas had built. But as they moved from room to room, Eleanor could envision herself here, could see how the space might embrace the next chapter of her life. What do you think? Rebecca asked as they stood in the sunlit living room with its original hardwood floors and craftsman-style built-in bookshelves. I think it's lovely, Eleanor admitted. I could see myself here. Rebecca smiled, but kept her professional demeanor. The market's moving quickly right now. This won't stay available for long. But there are other options if this one doesn't feel right. How much are they asking? Eleanor inquired, though she'd already noted the listing price in the materials Rebecca had provided. $450,000, Rebecca replied. Which is actually under market for this neighborhood, especially given the quality of the renovation. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Her own property, with its larger lot and the separate guesthouse parcel, was worth considerably more, potentially over $1 million in the current market. Even selling just the main house would provide more than enough for this purchase, with substantial funds remaining for her future security. I need to think about it, she said finally. But I'm definitely interested. Of course, Rebecca agreed. No rush. Take your time. But as they drove back to Eleanor's house, a plan was already forming in her mind, not just about the potential purchase, but about how to handle the larger situation with Richard and the property he had taken for granted for too long. Richard's car wasn't in the driveway when they returned, a small mercy that allowed Eleanor to invite Rebecca in for lunch without awkwardness. "I could use your professional advice," Eleanor said as they settled at the kitchen table with sandwiches and iced tea. "About the property situation." Rebecca set down her glass, giving Eleanor her full attention. "Of course. What are you thinking?" "I'm strongly considering selling, but I want to understand all my options before making any decisions," Eleanor explained. "Particularly regarding the guesthouse lot." Rebecca nodded. "As I see it, you have several options. You could sell both properties together, the main house and the guesthouse lot, which would maximize your return but would mean finding a buyer comfortable with the current tenant situation. Or?" Eleanor prompted. "You could sell just the main house and retain ownership of the guesthouse lot," Rebecca continued. "That would give you capital for your next purchase while maintaining some control over Richard's living situation." Eleanor considered this, turning the possibilities over in her mind. "And if I wanted to sell both properties, but separately?" "That's also an option," Rebecca confirmed. "The guesthouse lot would sell for less than the main property, of course, but given the neighborhood and the current market, it would still command a good price. Especially if the structure itself is in good condition." "It is," Eleanor assured her. "Thomas was meticulous about maintenance, and I've kept up with it since he passed. Richard hasn't exactly been handy around the place, but he hasn't damaged anything either." Rebecca hesitated, then asked carefully, "Have you thought about what this will mean for Richard? Not that his reaction should dictate your decisions. But he'll be impacted," Eleanor finished for her. "Yes, I've thought about it. Probably more than he deserves, given his behavior yesterday." Each decision about what to keep, what to discard, what to donate became a small act of reclaiming her autonomy. These were her possessions, accumulated over a lifetime. She alone would decide their fate. Richard was conspicuously absent, his car gone from the driveway by the time Eleanor woke up. She suspected he was avoiding her, processing the shock of her announcement in whatever way he could. Part of her hoped he was using the time to research apartments or housing options. The more realistic part of her expected he was complaining to friends or colleagues about his unreasonable mother. Around noon, her phone rang with a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Eleanor Winters." "Mrs. Winters, this is Vanessa Lawson." The voice was professionally pleasant but with an undertone of entitlement that immediately set Eleanor's teeth on edge. "I'm Richard's girlfriend. I believe he may have mentioned me." "He has. What can I do for you, Ms. Lawson?" "I understand there's been some confusion about your living situation. Richard is very concerned about your well-being, and I thought perhaps I could help clarify some things. As an elder care management professional, I have extensive experience helping families navigate these transitions." Eleanor bit back her initial response, which would have been neither polite nor productive. Instead, she took a measured breath and replied, "There's no confusion, Ms. Lawson. I've made a decision to sell my current property and downsize to a home that better suits my needs. It's a common and rational choice for someone in my stage of life. Of course, downsizing can be a wonderful option. But Richard mentioned you're looking at a house in Selwood? I'm concerned that might be too much maintenance for someone your age. Have you considered a retirement community? Many of them offer beautiful private residences with the benefit of services and support as needed. I'm quite capable of maintaining a small home. And should I need assistance with certain tasks in the future, there are services available that don't require surrendering my independence. Independence is important, but so is safety. Living alone at your age comes with risks that, Ms. Lawson. I appreciate your professional concern, but my housing decisions are not open for consultation, especially not from someone I've never met. If Richard has concerns about my choices, he's welcome to discuss them with me directly rather than enlisting his girlfriend to intervene. I'm only trying to help. Richard is worried about you making hasty decisions that could impact both your future and his." And there it was, the real reason for the call. Not concern for Eleanor's welfare, but concern for how her decisions would affect Richard. "My decision is neither hasty nor uninformed. I've consulted with financial advisors, real estate professionals, and others whose expertise I trust. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a busy afternoon ahead." She ended the call before Vanessa could respond, feeling a mixture of irritation and vindication. Richard had obviously shared at least some version of their conversations with his girlfriend, who had taken it upon herself to intervene. The presumption was breathtaking. But it also confirmed what Eleanor already knew: Richard was not going to accept her decision gracefully. He would resist, manipulate, and attempt to control the situation for as long as possible. Well, she had spent decades managing resistant students, demanding parents, and bureaucratic school boards. She could certainly manage one entitled son. And his meddling girlfriend. Her phone chimed with a text from Rebecca, sellers countered. Still a good price. Call when you can. Eleanor smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The future she wanted was within reach, a cozy home in a vibrant neighborhood, financial security, and the freedom to live life on her own terms. After decades of putting everyone else's needs first, her students, her husbands, her sons, it was finally time to prioritize her own. The counteroffer from the Selwood House sellers was reasonable, slightly higher than Eleanor's initial offer, but still below the original asking price. After a brief discussion with Rebecca, she decided to accept. I'll draw up the paperwork. Right away. And I've already started researching comps for your current property. The market's hot right now. I don't think you'll have any trouble selling, especially with the updates Thomas did to the kitchen before he passed. Thank you. For everything. Not just the real estate assistance, but for being someone I can trust. Through all of this. Always. You were there for me during the darkest time of my life. I'm just returning the favor. As Eleanor ended the call, she realized something she hadn't fully acknowledged before. Throughout her marriage to Richard, Rebecca had been more of a daughter to Eleanor than Richard had ever been a son to Thomas. She had shown interest in their lives, remembered birthdays and anniversaries, called just to check in. She had treated them with the respect and affection that should have come from their own child. Even after the divorce, when many former in-laws would have severed ties, Rebecca had maintained her relationship with Eleanor, recognizing the value of their connection beyond the legal bonds that had been broken. If family was defined by blood, then Richard was her only family. But if family was defined by love, respect, and mutual support, then Rebecca was as much her family as anyone could be. The revelation brought both clarity and a bittersweet comfort. Eleanor had lost so much, her beloved husband, the son she had raised and nurtured, the future she had envisioned. But she had also gained in ways she hadn't expected, a friendship that transcended conventional relationships, a newfound sense of her own strength and capability, and the courage to create a life that served her needs rather than others' expectations. As the afternoon light slanted through the kitchen windows, painting the familiar room in golden hues, Eleanor began to see her decision not as an ending, but as a beginning, the first step toward a future shaped by her own choices, her own values, her own vision of what her remaining years could be. Richard might see her as a burden, an inconvenience to be managed. But Eleanor Winters saw herself differently, as a woman with wisdom earned through decades of experience, with the strength to stand up for herself, and with the courage to embrace change when necessary. The house she would leave behind held precious memories, but those memories would travel with her. The new home she would create would hold new possibilities, new experiences, new joy. And if Richard couldn't understand or accept that, it was his loss, not hers. With renewed determination, Eleanor returned to her sorting and organizing, each decision a small step toward the future she was choosing for herself, a future based not on others' expectations or convenience, but on her own desires, needs, and dreams. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be practical challenges to navigate, emotional hurdles to overcome, and almost certainly more confrontations with Richard. But for the first time in years, Eleanor felt truly alive. Truly present in her own life. Not a supporting character in someone else's story, but the protagonist of her own. And that, she decided, was worth whatever difficulties lay ahead. We should list your current house as soon as possible. Given the market, it probably won't take long to sell, but you'll want the flexibility of timing if possible. Eleanor nodded, sipping her tea thoughtfully. And the guesthouse property? Rebecca hesitated. That's more complicated. Legally, we could list it immediately, but Richard is still living there. And hasn't made any effort to find alternative housing from what I can tell. In fact, Richard had been conspicuously absent since their confrontation, communicating only through terse text messages or, more irritatingly, through Vanessa, who had called twice more with helpful suggestions about Eleanor's housing situation. Eleanor had finally blocked her number after the third call descended into thinly veiled accusations about her mental competence. I think you need to have another conversation with him. Set a specific timeline for the guesthouse sale. Be firm. But fair. Eleanor sighed, knowing Rebecca was right. Avoiding Richard wasn't solving anything, and the limbo was allowing him to maintain the fiction that her plans might change, that she might be persuaded to reconsider. You're right. I'll talk to him this weekend. Lay everything out clearly. Rebecca smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Want me to be there as backup? I've had plenty of practice dealing with Richard's creative interpretations of reality. Eleanor laughed, grateful for the offer and the understanding behind it. Tempting, but I think this is a conversation I need to have one-on-one. Mother to son, without outside influences. Fair enough. But call me after, okay? I want to know how it goes. I will. The opportunity for that conversation came sooner than expected. When Eleanor returned home, Richard's car was in the driveway, and he was sitting on the front porch of the main house, an unusual choice given his recent avoidance. Mom. I was hoping we could talk. Eleanor studied him, noting the carefully casual outfit that nonetheless looked freshly pressed, the conciliatory expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. Richard was in sales mode, a persona she recognized from countless parent-teacher conferences where he'd attempted to charm his way out of consequences for missed assignments or behavioral issues. Of course. I was planning to speak with you as well. Shall we go inside? In the kitchen, neutral territory, neither his space nor her more personal areas, Eleanor poured 2 glasses of iced tea and sat across from her son at the table that had hosted 30 years of family meals, homework sessions, and difficult conversations. I've been thinking about our situation. And I think there's a solution that could work for both of us. Eleanor raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. You're right that this house is too big for you now. And I understand your desire to downsize. But instead of selling both properties, what if we reorganize things a bit? He leaned forward, entering full pitch mode. What if I moved into the main house, and you took the guest house? It's the perfect size for one person, everything on one level, easy to maintain. You'd still be on the property, close by if you needed anything, but with your own space and independence. Eleanor kept her expression neutral, though internally she marveled at the audacity. And the financial aspects of this arrangement? The mortgage, property taxes, utilities? Richard waved a hand dismissively. Details we could work out. The important thing is that you wouldn't have to leave the property you love, and I'd be right here to help as you get older. The unspoken subtext was clear. Richard would gain a valuable property while Eleanor would be relegated to the smaller, less valuable space, all under the guise of helping her. It was manipulative, self-serving, and entirely predictable. That's an interesting proposal. But it doesn't align with my plans. I've accepted an offer on a house in Selwood. The closing is in 30 days. Richard's carefully crafted expression faltered. You've already bought another house? Without discussing it with me? I didn't realize I needed your permission to purchase a home. It's not about permission. It's about making decisions as a family. About considering how your choices impact others. Like you considered how your words would impact me when you called me a burden? Richard had the grace to look momentarily abashed. I never called you a burden. I was just trying to have an honest conversation about the future. Richard, let's not rewrite history. You made it very clear that you see me as a potential obligation, a responsibility you're not willing to assume. And that's your right. But it's also my right to make decisions based on that reality. She took a sip of her tea, then continued with the calm authority that had once made difficult students straighten in their seats. I'm selling this house. I've accepted an offer on a new home that better suits my needs. And I will be selling the guest house property as well, though not immediately. You have until the end of October to find alternative housing. Richard stared at her, processing the finality in her tone. That's only 2 months. Which is twice as long as most landlords would give a tenant. And considerably more notice than you've given previous landlords when you've broken leases. The reference to his checkered rental history, a pattern of moving out when better options presented themselves, regardless of lease terms, hit home. Richard's expression hardened. So that's it? Decision made, no discussion? What happened to the mother who always taught me to talk things through, to find compromise? She learned that compromise requires good faith from both parties. It requires mutual respect and consideration. When those elements are missing, compromise becomes capitulation. Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is about punishing me for what I said. You're angry, and you're using this house situation to get back at me. Eleanor remained seated, refusing to escalate the confrontation. No, Richard. This is about me finally prioritizing my own needs after decades of putting others first. It's about creating a future that serves my well-being rather than accommodating others' expectations or convenience. Fine. Sell everything. Move across town. But don't expect me to be available when you need help, when you can't manage on your own anymore. The threat might have wounded Eleanor deeply just weeks ago. Now, it merely confirmed the wisdom of her decision. I've never expected you to be available, Richard. Your track record speaks for itself. What I do expect is for you to respect my decisions about my own life and property, and to make appropriate arrangements for your housing before the end of October. With that, she stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Richard stormed out, slamming the front door with enough force to rattle the windows, a childish display that reminded Eleanor painfully of the tantrums he'd thrown as a teenager when denied something he wanted. She sighed, clearing away the barely touched glasses of tea. The conversation had gone much as she'd expected, with Richard attempting manipulation, then bargaining, and finally anger when those tactics failed. She had no illusion that this was the end of his resistance, but at least the timeline was now clear. He had 2 months to find new housing, ample time for a professional adult with resources, if not necessarily comfortable for someone who had grown accustomed to paying no rent. True to her promise, Eleanor called Rebecca after Richard left, recounting the conversation with wry detachment. Classic Richard. Always looking for the angle that benefits him most while pretending it's for someone else's good. He hasn't changed. But I have. I might have considered his offer, might have convinced myself it was a reasonable solution. What's different now? I finally recognized my own worth. I realized that I deserve better than to be an afterthought in my own life, a problem to be managed by others. I deserve to create a future based on my own dreams and needs, not on others' convenience. The silence on the other end of the line held a weight of understanding that needed no further words. The following week brought a flurry of activity. Eleanor's current house was professionally photographed for the listing, small repairs were completed, and a stager came through to suggest minor adjustments to maximize the property's appeal. Through it all, Richard remained conspicuously absent, his car often gone from the driveway until late at night. Eleanor tried not to worry about where he was spending his time or whether he was making arrangements for new housing. She had set the boundary, provided reasonable notice, and now it was up to him to respond like the adult he chronologically was, if not emotionally. The listing for the main house went live on a Thursday morning. By Saturday, Rebecca had scheduled a dozen showings and reported serious interest from multiple potential buyers. The market is even hotter than I expected. We may have offers by Monday. Are you prepared for things to move this quickly? Eleanor considered the question carefully. The speed was both exciting and intimidating. Once the main house sold, the reality of her decision would be irrevocable. But wasn't that what she wanted? Clarity, commitment to her new path, a clean break from the weight of the past? Yes. I'm ready. Whatever comes, I can handle it. That's the Eleanor Winters I know. The woman who managed a school of 500 children and 50 staff members can certainly manage a home sale and move. The reminder of her professional competence bolstered Eleanor's confidence. She had navigated complex situations throughout her career, had made difficult decisions affecting hundreds of lives. This was just another challenge, another transition to manage with grace and determination. By Sunday evening, Rebecca called with news that exceeded even her optimistic projections. We have 5 offers. All over asking price. 2 are all cash, which would mean a faster closing if that's what you want. Eleanor sat down, momentarily overwhelmed by the reality of what was happening. That's remarkable. It's a testament to the home you and Thomas created. People can feel the love and care that went into this house. They want to be part of its story. The observation brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. Yes, the house held decades of memories, of love and loss, joy and sorrow. But those memories weren't contained in the physical structure, they lived in her heart, in her mind, in the life she had built with Thomas and would carry forward into her new home. Let me review the offers. I want to make a thoughtful decision, not just based on price. Of course. I'll email everything over now. We can discuss in the morning when you've had time to look them over. That night, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, carefully reviewing each offer. 2 were from young families eager to raise children in the spacious home with its established garden and proximity to good schools. 1 was from a couple in their 50s, empty nesters looking to upgrade from their starter home now that their children were grown. The remaining 2 were from investors, likely planning to renovate and flip the property for profit. The highest offer came from one of the investors, a cash deal with a 14-day close and no contingencies. It was tempting purely from a financial standpoint, but Eleanor found herself drawn to the letter included with the young family's offer. They had walked through the garden during their showing and fallen in love with the mature fruit trees, the carefully tended perennial beds, the sense of established peace that Thomas had worked so hard to create. We can envision our children climbing the apple tree, just as we're told your son once did. We would cherish this home and continue the legacy of love that's so evident in every corner. The reference to Richard brought a complex wave of emotion. Yes, he had climbed that tree, had played in that garden, had filled this home with childish laughter before adolescence and ambition had hardened him into the man he'd become. Was there value in knowing another generation of children would experience the joy this property could provide? By morning, Eleanor had made her decision. She would accept the family's offer, even though it wasn't the highest in pure dollar terms. Their financing was solid, their timeline aligned with her own, and most importantly, they valued the home for what it was, not just an investment or asset, but a place where life happened, where memories were made. Rebecca supported the decision wholeheartedly. It's your house. You get to decide who becomes its next steward. The paperwork was completed by Tuesday, with a closing date set for 30 days out, perfect synchronization with Eleanor's purchase of the Selwood bungalow. The pieces were falling into place with a harmony that felt almost predestined, as if the universe were confirming the rightness of her choice. The only dissonant note was Richard's continued absence and silence. Eleanor had texted him about the accepted offer on the main house, keeping the communication factual and businesslike. His only response had been a terse noted. No questions about the terms, the timeline, or how it might affect the guesthouse situation. No acknowledgement of the significance of selling the family home. No indication that he was making any plans for his own housing come October. Eleanor tried not to let his response, or lack thereof, dampen her optimism about the future. She had spent too many years adjusting her emotions to accommodate Richard's moods, his disappointments, his judgments. No more. This was her journey, her transition, her new beginning. If he chose not to participate constructively, that was his loss. Instead, she focused on the practical tasks at hand, sorting through decades of accumulation, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to discard. It was a physically and emotionally demanding process, but also unexpectedly liberating. Each decision felt like reclaiming a small piece of herself, asserting her values and priorities in tangible ways. Rebecca stopped by frequently, offering both practical assistance and moral support. Together they packed books, sorted through kitchen equipment, and organized the closets that had somehow accumulated far more than Eleanor remembered purchasing. It's amazing how much stuff we collect without realizing it. Thomas used to tease me about never throwing anything away. Just in case was my justification for keeping everything from old curtains to mismatched silverware. And now? Eleanor considered them for a moment, then decisively added them to the donation pile. Now I'm keeping only what serves my current life, not what might hypothetically be useful someday. It's incredibly freeing. It's a powerful metaphor. Letting go of physical objects that no longer serve you, just as you're letting go of expectations and patterns that don't support your well-being. Eleanor nodded, struck by the insight. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. It's all part of the same process, creating space for what matters now, not what mattered in the past or might matter in some imagined future. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of sorting and packing punctuated by occasional reminiscences about particular items or the stories they evoked. I've been thinking. The guesthouse situation with Richard. Eleanor sighed, setting down the box she'd been labeling. Still no word from him about his plans. I'm beginning to think he's just going to ignore the deadline and force a confrontation. That wouldn't surprise me. But that's not what I was going to suggest. I was thinking about potential buyers for that property. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Questioningly. What if I bought it? Rebecca proposed, a hint of nervousness in her voice. I've been saving for a down payment on a place of my own, and the timing might work out. It would give you a buyer you know and trust, and… She hesitated, then continued, it would mean I'd still be close by after you moved to Selwood. The suggestion caught Eleanor by surprise. You'd want to live in the guest house? Even with its history with Richard? Rebecca smiled wryly. I lived with Richard for 15 years. I think I can handle a house he briefly occupied. And it's a charming property in a neighborhood I love, close to my office. From a purely practical standpoint, it makes sense. Eleanor considered the proposal, turning it over in her mind. There was something poetically fitting about Rebecca taking ownership of the property Richard had treated so carelessly. And the idea of maintaining that connection, of knowing the guest house would be occupied by someone who valued it properly, held significant appeal. I'd need to have it professionally appraised. And you'd need to get your own inspection done. I wouldn't want any surprises for either of us. Of course. All the proper procedures, everything transparent and above board. I wouldn't want our friendship compromised by a business transaction gone wrong. Then I think it's a wonderful idea. The guesthouse question had been a lingering source of stress: how to market it with a reluctant occupant, how to manage showings, how to ensure a timely sale when Richard seemed determined to complicate the process. Rebecca's offer elegantly solved those problems while creating a new possibility that resonated with Eleanor's values: passing the property to someone who would care for it, appreciate it, and maintain the connection that had become so important to both of them. We should get the process started soon. That way, we can close around the same time as your other transactions, minimizing disruption and uncertainty. Eleanor nodded, already feeling more settled with this piece of the puzzle potentially falling into place. I'll call my appraiser tomorrow. And we should probably inform Richard sooner rather than later. He's not going to be happy. Rebecca's expression turned serious. No, he's not. But that's not your responsibility, Ellie. You've given him fair notice, more than reasonable accommodation. His reaction is his to manage, not yours to fix. I know. It's just, he's still my son, despite everything. I don't want to hurt him unnecessarily. The key word being unnecessarily. Some hurt may be inevitable here, but it's the natural consequence of his choices, not the result of your cruelty. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the truth in Rebecca's words. She had spent decades shielding Richard from the consequences of his actions, making excuses for his behavior, smoothing over the conflicts he created. That pattern had not served him well, had not helped him develop the emotional maturity or responsibility he should have cultivated long ago. Perhaps this situation, painful as it might be for all involved, was necessary, a catalyst for growth that might not come any other way. I'll speak with him tomorrow. Clearly and directly, with as much compassion as possible, but without compromising on the essentials. Rebecca smiled, reaching over to squeeze Eleanor's hand. That approach has served you well throughout your career. I have no doubt it will serve you well now. As they returned to their sorting and packing, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. The path ahead was becoming increasingly defined, not without challenges, certainly, but with a destination worth the journey. A home that would support her needs, financial security for her future, and the freedom to live according to her own values and priorities. Richard might see her choices as a rejection, a punishment, or a betrayal. But Eleanor knew the truth, this was not about him at all. It was about her finally recognizing her own worth, her own right to create a life that served her well-being rather than others' expectations or convenience. In the fading afternoon light, surrounded by the physical evidence of decades lived with purpose and love, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about the future, about the possibilities that awaited her in this new chapter of her life. Whatever challenges lay ahead, with Richard, with the move, with adjusting to a new home and community, she would face them with the same strength, wisdom, and determination that had carried her through 65 years of life's joys and sorrows. She was not a burden to be managed. She was not a problem to be solved. She was Eleanor Winters, retired educator, widow, mother, friend, and architect of her own destiny. And she was just getting started. Moving day. The culmination of weeks of planning, sorting, packing, and more than a few tears shed over treasured mementos and difficult decisions. The moving company would arrive in an hour to transport her carefully labeled boxes to the Selwood bungalow, her new home, her fresh start. She sipped her coffee from one of the few mugs she hadn't yet packed, savoring both the rich flavor and the bittersweet moment. 30 years in this house. 3 decades of life lived fully, of love shared generously, of growth and loss and everything in between. The walls held the echoes of Thomas's laughter, of Richard's childhood footsteps, of countless gatherings with friends and family. But walls couldn't contain memories, those traveled with her, residing not in physical spaces but in her heart and mind. The realization had been gradual but profound, allowing her to approach this transition with grace rather than grief. Her phone chimed with a text from Rebecca, all set for closing at 2 p.m. Keys to your new home by 4 p.m. Need anything before then? Eleanor smiled, typing back, all under control here. See you at the title company. The synchronization of the closings had worked out perfectly. She would sign the papers transferring ownership of her longtime home to its new family, then proceed directly to finalize the purchase of the Selwood bungalow. By evening, she would be sleeping under a new roof, beginning the next chapter of her life. The only unresolved piece of the puzzle was Richard and the guesthouse situation. True to form, he had avoided any substantive conversation about his plans, responding to Eleanor's attempts at discussion with vague assurances that he was working on it or outright disappearing for days at a time. When she had informed him about Rebecca's interest in purchasing the guesthouse property, his reaction had been predictably negative. My ex-wife? Are you serious? Of all the potential buyers in Portland, you choose her? Rebecca made a fair offer based on a professional appraisal. And yes, I appreciate the continuity of selling to someone I know and trust. This is about punishing me. Making sure I have nowhere to go, then twisting the knife by giving my home to Rebecca. It's not your home, Richard. It's a property I own. That you've been occupying rent-free as a guest. And Rebecca's purchase has nothing to do with punishing you. It's a practical solution that benefits everyone involved. The conversation had ended there, with Richard storming off in a manner that suggested he was still 17 rather than 42. In the days since, his car had rarely been in the driveway, and Eleanor had caught glimpses of him removing boxes and furniture from the guest house, progress, at least, though grudging and unacknowledged. The deadline she had set was still a month away, the end of October, but with the main house closing today, the timeline for the guest house sale to Rebecca was accelerating. They hoped to close by mid-October, which would give Richard just 2 more weeks to complete his move. Eleanor pushed those concerns aside for now, focusing instead on the immediate tasks at hand. The movers would arrive soon, and she wanted to make one final walkthrough of the house to ensure nothing essential had been overlooked in the packing process. Room by room, she moved through the space that had been her home for so long: the living room where Thomas had taught Richard to play chess, the dining room that had hosted 30 Thanksgiving dinners, the study where she had prepared countless lesson plans and administrative reports during her years as principal. Each space held memories, but each also represented a past that was complete. The future awaited in Selwood, in a home better suited to her current needs and desires, in a community where she could build new connections while maintaining the ones that mattered most. By the time the moving truck arrived, Eleanor felt ready, not just logistically prepared, but emotionally centered in her decision. This was right. This was necessary. This was the path forward that honored both her past and her future. The movers worked efficiently, loading her carefully labeled boxes and the furniture she had chosen to keep. Many larger pieces had been sold or donated, unnecessary in her smaller new home and often carrying memories that felt better honored in memory than in daily presence. By noon, the house stood nearly empty, the rooms echoing slightly as Eleanor made a final walkthrough with the team leader. "That's everything, Mrs. Winters. We'll head over to the new address now and start unloading. Should take about 3 hours to get everything in place according to your floor plan." "Thank you. I'll be there by late afternoon, after the closings." Left alone in the emptied house, Eleanor felt a momentary wave of emotion, not regret, exactly, but acknowledgement of the magnitude of this transition. She allowed herself to feel it fully, to honor the life she had lived here and the memories that would always remain precious. Then, squaring her shoulders, she picked up her purse and the small overnight bag containing essentials for the next 24 hours, and walked out the front door without looking back. The past had been lived fully. The future awaited. The closing proceedings at the title company were smooth and efficient. Eleanor signed the documents transferring ownership of her longtime home to the young family, who attended in person with their toddler daughter in tow. "We're so honored to be the next stewards of your beautiful home. The garden especially, we can't wait to tend those fruit trees. My husband planted those trees the year we moved in. He always said a home isn't truly yours until you've grown something that outlasts the seasons. That's beautiful. We'll make sure they thrive for the next 30 years. The exchange left Eleanor feeling peaceful about her decision. The house would be loved, the garden tended, new memories created within those familiar walls. Life continuing its natural cycle of renewal and growth. An hour later, she sat at another table in the same office, this time signing documents to complete her purchase of the Selwood bungalow. Rebecca sat beside her, having taken the afternoon off to support Eleanor through both closings. "And that's it. Congratulations, Mrs. Winters. You are now the official owner of 1842 Maple Street." Rebecca squeezed her hand as the agent handed over the keys, small metal symbols of new beginnings, of doors opening to possibilities yet to be discovered. "How does it feel?" Eleanor considered the question thoughtfully. "Surreal. 30 years in one place creates deep roots. But also, invigorating. Like I've been holding my breath without realizing it, and now I can finally exhale." "That's a perfect description. Want me to come with you to see the new place? The movers should be nearly finished by now." "I'd like that. And perhaps we could order dinner afterward? A small celebration of new beginnings." The Selwood bungalow welcomed Eleanor with afternoon sunlight streaming through its freshly washed windows, illuminating hardwood floors that gleamed with recent polishing. The moving team had followed her floor plan perfectly, positioning furniture and stacking labeled boxes in their designated rooms. "It already feels like home. I thought it would take time, that it would feel strange at first, but you belong here. I felt the same way when I bought my condo after the divorce. Some spaces just welcome you immediately." They unpacked the kitchen essentials together, arranging dishes in cabinets and setting up the coffee maker for tomorrow morning. Eleanor had been strategic in her packing, ensuring that the most necessary items would be easily accessible on the first day. "The house sale proceeds were deposited to your account. Have you thought about what you'll do with them? Besides purchasing this place, I mean." Eleanor nodded, having given the matter considerable thought in recent weeks. "I'm meeting with my financial advisor next week to finalize the details, but I've made some decisions. A portion will go into my retirement accounts to ensure long-term security. Another portion will be invested for potential care needs down the road. I have no intention of becoming dependent on anyone, and that requires planning." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Smart. And the rest?" "Some will be set aside for traveling. I've always wanted to see Italy, to visit the art museums and historical sites I taught about for so many years. There's a river cruise through southern France. That looks particularly appealing." "Ellie, that's wonderful. I can absolutely see you exploring European museums and charming cafes. When would you go? Next spring, I think. Give myself time to settle in here, to establish new routines and connections in the neighborhood. Then, when everything blooms again, I'll embark on the adventures I've postponed for too long. They ordered Thai food delivered for dinner, inaugurating the dining nook with containers of pad Thai and spring rolls, glasses of wine, and conversation that flowed easily between practical matters and deeper reflections. To new beginnings. And to the courage it takes to create them. To new beginnings. And to unexpected friendships that transcend conventional boundaries. They were finishing their meal when Eleanor's phone rang with Richard's number displayed on the screen. She hesitated, then answered, putting the call on speaker so Rebecca could hear. Hello, Richard. Mom. His voice sounded strained, almost unrecognizable. I need to talk to you. Where are you? I'm at my new home. Today was moving day, as you knew. The closings went smoothly. A beat of silence, then, you really did it. You actually sold the house. Yes. As I've been telling you I would for weeks now. I thought. Richard's voice trailed off, then strengthened with an edge of accusation. I thought you were bluffing, trying to scare me into agreeing with your assisted living plan. Eleanor sighed, maintaining her patience with effort. Richard. I never had an assisted living plan. That was your suggestion, not mine. I've been clear about my intentions from the beginning, to sell the property and downsize to a home that better suits my current needs. But where am I supposed to go? The question burst from him with raw emotion, a vulnerability rarely displayed in his adult years. You've sold the house out from under me with barely any notice. I gave you 2 months' notice. And the guesthouse deadline is still a month away. That's considerably more time than most landlords would provide, especially for someone not paying rent. I'm not someone, I'm your son. Family is supposed to take care of each other, not throw each other out when it's inconvenient. The irony of his statement was breathtaking, given his earlier characterization of her as a burden he wasn't willing to assume responsibility for. But Eleanor resisted the urge to point this out directly. Yes, families should support each other. That support takes many forms, but it always includes respect for each other's autonomy and decisions. I've made my decision, Richard. The house is sold. The guest house will be sold to Rebecca by mid-October. You have until then to make appropriate arrangements. Another pause, this one longer and heavier with unspoken emotions. When Richard spoke again, his voice had shifted to something Eleanor recognized from decades of parenting, the tone he used when attempting manipulation through guilt. I never thought I'd see the day when my own mother would choose money over her only child's well-being. Dad would be so disappointed. The words were designed to wound, to leverage Eleanor's love for Thomas and her dedication as a mother to undermine her resolve. In the past, such tactics might have worked. Today, they only reinforced the rightness of her decision. Your father believed in personal responsibility above all else. He would expect his adult son to stand on his own feet, not depend indefinitely on his mother's resources. And he would be proud of me for creating a future that honors my needs rather than sacrificing my security for others' convenience. Richard made a sound of frustration. This isn't about convenience. It's about having a roof over my head, which you are fully capable of securing for yourself. You have a well-paying job, no dependents since Jake and Emma are with Rebecca, and no health issues that prevent employment. There are numerous apartments available in your price range throughout Portland. The rental market is impossible right now. And I can't afford the deposits and first month's rent that most places require. If you'd just give me more time. Richard. I've given you time. I've given you support. I've given you opportunities to establish yourself independently. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own choices and their consequences. The silence that followed felt weighted with decades of similar conversations, of patterns established and reinforced until they seemed immutable. But they weren't immutable. Eleanor had proven that by breaking free of her own patterns of accommodation and enablement. So that's it. You've made your decision, and my situation doesn't matter to you at all. Your situation matters to me. Your well-being matters to me. But I've come to understand that continuing to shield you from the consequences of your choices isn't actually supporting your well-being. It's enabling patterns that prevent you from developing the resilience and responsibility you need to thrive. She paused, then added with genuine compassion, I love you, Richard. I always have, and I always will. But love doesn't mean sacrificing my future security or surrendering my autonomy. It means wanting what's truly best for both of us, even when that's difficult in the short term. Richard's laugh held no humor. Save the motivational speech, Mom. You've made yourself clear. Don't expect to hear from me anytime soon. The call ended abruptly, leaving Eleanor and Rebecca in stunned silence. After a moment, Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze Eleanor's hand. Are you okay? Eleanor considered the question, probing her emotional state with the self-awareness she'd developed through decades of working with challenging students and their families. Yes. I am. Sad for the relationship Richard and I might have had under different circumstances. Disappointed that he still refuses to take responsibility for his situation. But at peace with my decisions and their necessity. You were amazing. Clear, firm, but still compassionate. That's a difficult balance to maintain, especially with someone determined to make you the villain in their narrative. Eleanor smiled. Riley. 40 years in education teaches you a thing or two about maintaining boundaries while preserving relationships. Though I'm not sure the relationship with Richard can be preserved at this point. That's his choice. You've left the door open for a healthier dynamic in the future. Whether he walks through it is up to him. They finished their meal in companionable silence, the weight of the conversation with Richard gradually lifting as they turned their attention to more immediate concerns, where certain kitchen items should be stored, which unpacking tasks should take priority tomorrow, what time the cable company would arrive to set up internet service. By the time Rebecca left, promising to return the next day to help with further unpacking, Eleanor felt settled in her new space, both physically and emotionally. The call with Richard had been difficult but clarifying, reinforcing the wisdom of her choices rather than undermining them. That night, sleeping in her new bedroom for the first time, Eleanor experienced a profound sense of peace. The space was smaller than her previous master bedroom, but thoughtfully arranged with the furniture and artwork she had chosen to bring forward into this new chapter. The neighborhood sounds were different, more urban, less shielded by large trees and sprawling property, but not unpleasant. This was her home now. Her choice, her space, designed to support her needs and desires rather than accommodate others' expectations or convenience. There would be adjustments, certainly, and moments of missing the familiar. But there would also be discoveries, new connections, unexpected joys that could only emerge from embracing change rather than resisting it. As she drifted toward sleep, Eleanor reflected on the journey of the past month, from the painful confrontation with Richard that had catalyzed her decisions, to this moment of new beginnings. It had not been an easy path, requiring courage, determination, and the willingness to break patterns established over decades. But it had been the right path. The necessary path. The path that honored her worth, her autonomy, and her right to create a future that served her well-being rather than sacrificing it for others' convenience. Richard might never understand or accept her choices. He might continue to cast her as the villain in his personal narrative, the uncaring mother who prioritized her own interests over her son's needs. But Eleanor knew the truth. She had spent decades prioritizing others, adjusting her needs and desires to accommodate Richard's demands, Thomas's preferences, her students' requirements, her staff's expectations. It was finally her turn to prioritize herself. Not selfishly or carelessly, but thoughtfully and deliberately, with the wisdom earned through 65 years of living, loving, and learning. As sleep claimed her, one final thought surfaced from the depths of her consciousness, a quote from her favorite poet, Mary Oliver, that had guided her through many difficult transitions. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Tonight, Eleanor Winters had an answer. She planned to live it fully, on her own terms, with courage and joy in the freedom that comes from recognizing your own worth. The morning brought sunshine streaming through new windows, illuminating possibilities rather than memories. Eleanor rose early, establishing the beginning of new routines in her new space, coffee on the small back patio, watching birds visit the feeder the previous owners had installed, planning her day with the careful intentionality that had served her well throughout her career. Today would be about unpacking, about transforming this house into her home through the deliberate placement of cherished objects and the creation of functional systems. Tomorrow would bring exploration of her new neighborhood, the local grocery store, the library branch, the community center with its schedule of activities for seniors. The future stretched before her, not as a diminishment or narrowing of possibilities as Richard had implied with his insistence on assisted living, but as an expansion, new experiences, new connections, new ways of expressing herself and contributing to the world around her. A text from Rebecca interrupted her morning reflection. Moving truck at the guest house this morning. Appears Richard is finally packing up in earnest. Eleanor smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Perhaps Richard was finally accepting the reality of the situation, taking steps toward independence rather than continuing to resist the inevitable. It was a small but significant sign of potential growth. That's good news. And makes the transition smoother for your purchase. Rebecca's response came quickly. Closing date confirmed for October 15th, keys to my new home by end of day. The excitement in those words warmed Eleanor's heart. Rebecca deserved this new beginning as much as she did, a home of her own after years of rebuilding her life post-divorce, a space that represented security and autonomy rather than painful compromise. There was poetic justice in Rebecca taking ownership of the property Richard had treated so carelessly, in her creating a home where he had merely occupied space. But more than that, there was continuity in their connection, in the friendship that had transcended conventional boundaries to become something precious to them both. 2 weeks later, Eleanor stood in her fully settled new home, surveying the results of her careful planning and Rebecca's generous assistance. The Selwood bungalow now reflected her personality and preferences in every corner, from the reading nook by the front window with its comfortable chair and well-stocked bookshelf, to the kitchen organized for efficiency and enjoyment, to the small home office where she had begun volunteering remotely for a literacy program serving underprivileged children. The downsizing had been liberating rather than limiting, forcing thoughtful decisions about what truly mattered, what deserved space in her new life. The result was a home that supported her current needs and desires perfectly, with nothing superfluous or burdensome to maintain. Today was a milestone, Rebecca's closing on the guesthouse property. Eleanor had received confirmation from her attorney that the transaction was complete, the funds transferred, the deed recorded. Another piece of her past transformed into something that served the future she and Rebecca were both creating. Richard had moved out 3 days earlier, leaving the guesthouse in reasonably good condition but making no attempt to communicate with Eleanor directly. Through her attorney, she learned he had secured an apartment in a neighboring suburb, not the luxury accommodation he might have preferred, but a decent place within his budget, a first step toward genuine independence. Whether that step would lead to growth, to maturation, to a healthier relationship between them eventually, Eleanor couldn't predict. She had left the door open for reconciliation, making it clear through her attorney that she remained open to communication when Richard was ready to engage respectfully. But she wasn't waiting for that reconciliation to live her life fully. She had joined a water aerobics class at the community center, meeting women her age with similar interests and experiences. She had volunteered at the neighborhood libraries' children's reading hour, finding joy in sharing stories with young minds just beginning their educational journeys. She had explored local restaurants and cafes, establishing favorite spots and becoming a recognized regular at the bakery 3 blocks from her home. In short, she was building a life that reflected her values, interests, and desires, not as an appendage to someone else's story, but as the protagonist of her own. The doorbell rang, interrupting her reflections. Eleanor opened it to find Rebecca standing on her porch, grinning broadly and holding a bottle of champagne. It's official. I am now the proud owner of one charming guesthouse on a lovely lot in a desirable neighborhood. Congratulations. I couldn't be happier about who's taking ownership of that property. They settled in the living room with glasses of champagne, toasting their respective new beginnings and the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. Have you heard anything from Richard? Not directly. My attorney confirmed he's moved to an apartment in Beaverton. Beyond that, I'm giving him space to process everything that's happened. Rebecca nodded understanding. It's all been a significant adjustment. For everyone. Yes. But adjustments can lead to growth, if we're open to the lessons they offer. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their champagne and reflecting on the transformations of the past months. I've been thinking about everything that's happened since that Sunday brunch when Richard first suggested you were becoming a burden. Eleanor winced slightly at the memory, though the pain had dulled considerably with time and perspective. What about it? In a strange way, we should almost be grateful to him. If he hadn't been so thoughtlessly cruel that day, would you have had the catalyst to make these changes? To recognize your own worth and create this new chapter for yourself? Eleanor considered the question seriously, turning it over in her mind like a complex puzzle. Perhaps not. At least, not with the same clarity or determination. Sometimes it takes a shock to break patterns we've lived with for so long we no longer see them clearly. Exactly. His selfishness inadvertently freed you to prioritize yourself, perhaps for the first time in decades. There's a certain irony there. Though I wouldn't recommend his approach as a general strategy for helping parents downsize. They both laughed, the sound filling the cozy living room with warmth and genuine joy, the laughter of women who had navigated difficult transitions with grace and emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentically themselves. To unintended consequences. And to the wisdom to recognize the gifts they sometimes bring. To unintended consequences. And to the courage to create a future based on our own worth, not others' expectations. As the afternoon sun slanted through her new windows, painting the room in golden light, Eleanor Winters felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the material security she had established through her careful planning, but for the spiritual and emotional freedom she had claimed by recognizing her own worth and standing firmly in her own truth. Richard had called her a burden, had seen her only in terms of what she could provide or what she might cost him. In doing so, he had inadvertently given her the greatest gift possible, the motivation to break free from patterns of accommodation and self-sacrifice that had limited her for too long. She was not a burden to be managed. She was not a problem to be solved. She was Eleanor Winters, retired educator, widow, mother, friend, and now, finally and fully, the author of her own story. And that story was just beginning its most interesting chapter.